You know, I'm not the kind of person that owns a whole lot of pairs of shoes. I'm not really a sneakerhead. I don't get crazy excited about shoes. I typically have one single pair of shoes that I wear pretty much every day for every occasion that I can get away with it until they're completely falling apart. And even then, I don't get rid of them. I retire them. They become my yard work shoes, so I keep using them until they're completely falling apart, and then Janie usually throws them away before I ever get around to it. But I'm not crazy about shoes. I'm not using shoes to try to impress people most of the time. Don't get me wrong, I do care what they look like. I'm really picky about my shoes, but I'm not looking for them as some major statement piece, fashion piece, or something about who I am, except one time. The only time I ever bought a pair of Under Armour shoes was for a very specific purpose, to try to impress a very specific person. About halfway through my junior year of college, I met this girl named Janie, and I was having a really hard time talking with her. I was being a little bit awkward. I have so many stories I could share, but I'm not going to share any of those right now. But over Christmas break, I was thinking to myself, like, this girl needs to know that she and I are really the same, like deep down inside where it counts. So I bought a pair of Under Armour shoes, hoping that would communicate our like-mindedness. I just noticed she was always wearing Under Armour stuff. I was like, this is gonna work. It didn't, but I tried. So don't make fun of me too much, because I do think that we all somewhat inherently get this. The types of shoes you wear may not always, but they can communicate something about your personality, or maybe about your work or your hobbies. So we don't all use shoes to represent who we are, but I think we understand how that can be communicated. So we're kicking off our shoes series today. You know, it's fine. The first service didn't like that joke either, but I don't care. I think it's funny. So I stuck with it. But each pair of shoes that we're gonna look at represents somebody's life. So you know the expression, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes? That's a little bit what we're going to be trying to do with this series. We want to take a look at a few different people from the Bible and try to understand them, see if there's anything that we can identify with, and then we're going to watch them interact with Jesus. Put ourselves in our shoes and maybe just see how that interaction changed their life. Because no matter what kind of shoes you wear, Jesus wants to relate to you. He wants to have an encounter with you that could maybe change everything. And that's what we want to accomplish with this series. We want to make sure that we're prepared to have an encounter with Jesus that could change everything. And that leads me to a question. If we were to look at your life through the lens of a pair of shoes, what kind of shoes would they be? Right, so if we were gonna say you had to pick one pair of shoes that represents your life, your personality, what would it be? Maybe a set of basketball shoes, maybe some work boots, maybe some slippers. I don't know, you like to take it easy, or some flip-flops. I just want to relax on a cruise ship for the rest of my life. I don't know, but for our table talk time this morning, I know we're a little bit spread out, so we're gonna get together, try to create a sense of community here. I would like to talk about what kind of shoes represent your life and why. Let's take just a couple of minutes and share with each other on that. Well, I hope that was kind of fun for you guys to talk about. It sounds like you were having some good conversation at your tables. It's great. You know, throughout his time here on earth, Jesus encountered a lot of different people that wore many different kinds of shoes. And all of those encounters left their mark on people. And I think Christmas time is a perfect time to have this conversation because I want to have an encounter with Jesus. And there are people in my life that I know and love that I desperately want to have an encounter with Jesus. And not just a casual one, not one like where we fondly remember the baby Jesus in the manger and then we go out and buy a bunch of presents and crash into the new year like nothing ever happened. I want the kind of encounter that changes things, that maybe leaves me never the same. I want that for my friends, for my family. I want people to encounter Jesus in such a way that their lives are never the same again. And I'm sure you're there with me. Either you've been going through life on your own and it's just not working. The marriage is struggling, work is horrible, the addictions are overpowering, or maybe you don't have a good relationship with your kids. Whatever it is, maybe you came in here this morning hoping for a change. Or maybe you just know somebody who's struggling and doesn't know where to look for help. May I suggest that an encounter with Jesus could bring about the life change that we're looking for? So the only question I have at that point is, how can we have that? What can we do? How can we have an encounter with Jesus that can have the power to alter our lives or alter the lives of the people that we love? And I think this first pair of shoes can give us some insight into that question, because this morning we're going to look at these military boots that represent the Roman centurion. We see his story in Luke chapter 7, and I think this is a really good way to start off this series because I think he can show us how to prepare our hearts for an encounter with Jesus. So let's walk through his story together and see what it was that helped him have a powerful encounter with Jesus. We'll pick it up in verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. I need to pause right there for just 1 second because what was it that he just finished saying? In Luke, this story comes immediately after the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus just finished his greatest sermon that we have recorded, and the people are absolutely amazed. In Matthew's account of it, it tells us why. In Matthew chapter 7, 28 and 29, it says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority, not like their teachers of the law. Jesus taught like someone who had authority. It was his teaching, the way he held himself, the way he talked. People just knew this guy had authority. He had a gravity about him. Do you know people like that? I feel like most of us know somebody like that who just kind of, they may not even have a position of authority, but people just tend to gravitate to them. The way they speak, people like to follow them. They lead with them. Some people just have this, and Jesus was this way to the extreme. He didn't need a position of authority. People followed him because of his character. But we'll get to that in just a second. Let's keep going in verse 2. There, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he's built our synagogue." So here we meet this centurion. Now, centurion was an officer in the Roman army, fairly high up in rank, a guy who was in charge of at least 100 soldiers. And here in this city, I think a lot of us can either identify ourselves or we know somebody who can identify with this military boot-wearing centurion. We're familiar with this. My brother-in-law is actually an officer in the army. He's a company commander. My father-in-law explained to me that would be a fairly equivalent rank. Jared oversees 200 men in the army. So we at least know people. If you're not someone yourself, we know people who can identify with this guy, who kind of understands the world that he lives in. We're surrounded in this city by these hardworking, self-sacrificing individuals in the military, and their families are no different. But as a military man, I think we can assume some things about him, that he understands authority. This guy would be somebody who understands the chain of command, how these things work. He would have worked himself up through the ranks to get to this point. Now, there's several things here in these verses that I want to make sure we catch, because these few verses give us an enormous insight into the character of this particular centurion. First of all, I would like to point out that this guy has never met Jesus personally, face to face. And as we go through the rest of the story, we'll find he never actually does meet Jesus face to face. This guy had an encounter with Jesus through other people who knew Jesus. Sometimes Jesus just needs people who do know him to make an introduction on his behalf. Some people can encounter Jesus through you and through me, and that needs to be a part of our prayers going into the new year. Jesus, how can I introduce people to you? But enough about us. I want to talk about the centurion, because normally Jews were not big fans of centurions. Jews weren't big fans of anybody who represented Roman occupation. Obviously, they were enslaved to Rome, right? So this was part of their major issue with tax collectors too. So the fact that this guy had Jewish elders arguing on his behalf, pleading with Jesus, saying he deserves this, is a huge deal. So why are they doing that? What made this guy different? Well, it's pretty normal for Roman soldiers to be asserting their power over the Jewish people. They would bully them around. It wasn't an uncommon thing for anyone really in authority to assert that over people, to flex that authority over people. But in verse 2, I think we see how this centurion is really different. When it said there, a centurion's servant whom his master valued highly was sick and about to die. In Roman culture, servants or slaves did not have any value as people. They were viewed as property, and they were only valuable so long as they were useful, not because they had any kind of intrinsic worth. They were seen as disposable. But that wasn't the case with this centurion. When it says the servant was highly valued, the Greek word that was used there is actually entomos, which means dear, precious, valuable. It's actually where we get our English word intimate from. They were close, they were friends. And so this guy clearly does not view authority in the same way that Rome does. Because Rome used authority very similar to how we do in America today. You could essentially create your pyramid-shaped org chart, and authority comes from the top down. If you're placed in a position above somebody else, you have the right to tell them what to do, and they have to listen, or else they will be reprimanded. The Jews worked this way also. Their teachers, their rabbis were given authority because of their position, because of their study, and depending on which rabbi they actually studied under would affect how much authority and honor they were given. It was kind of like picking the right college. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were in positions of authority. They didn't get along with Jesus for a lot of reasons, some of that being that people were giving him authority that he did not deserve outside of his position. He didn't deserve any honor, but as we see coming out of the Sermon on the Mount, they were giving it to Jesus anyway. This bothered a lot of people. They were giving it to him because of the way he spoke, because of his character. These teachers of the law, the religious leaders of the day, placed themselves in authority. They elevated themselves to a superior position above everybody else, and they led from the top down. They told everyone else what to do, and they demanded respect. But in all of the Gospels, there is not one single instance where Jesus demanded respect from anybody. That's not the way Jesus liked to lead. He didn't force people to follow him because, hey, I'm God, you should do what I say. In our staff D1 time 2 weeks ago, Dan actually shared a thought with us that I really liked. He said, if Jesus hadn't become a man, I don't think I would be a Christian today. And he went on to explain, if Jesus just came to earth and said, hey, I'm God, and here's all the proof you need that I'm God, you need to follow me, I think that would incite more rebellion than knowing that he was willing to become just like me. I love that thought because I think he's right. The people even started calling Jesus rabbi, teacher, but he wasn't. And this is how Jesus liked to lead. He led by not having a position over them, but becoming like us, caring for us, interacting with us. Hebrews 2 puts it this way, starting in verse 14, since the children have flesh and blood, He too shared in their humanity so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. And then skip to verse 17, it says, "For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people." I love the phrase that Jesus had to be made like us. His care for us, it compelled him. He didn't want to just be God. Isn't that crazy? He wanted to become like us so he could identify with us, so he could become more merciful, so he could become a better mediator between us and God. To Jesus, leadership is not about your position, but your disposition. And this is why the people gave him authority and honor. And it seems to me that this centurion saw things the same way. And the people under him respected him for that. They went to bat for him because of that. All right, bosses, do we have any bosses in here? Are you hearing that? Or parents, are you hearing that? Yes, people should respect us for our position. Yes, our kids should respect us just because we're their parents. But does our disposition with people actually earn that respect? And Jesus and this centurion had a bottom-up approach to leadership and authority, and people lovingly followed them because of that. But let's keep going in this interaction because I think it gets even better. Pick it up in verse 6. "So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends out to say to him, 'Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof.'" This is huge. It would be really easy to read right past this, but I don't want to miss this. The centurion called Jesus Lord. He's putting Jesus in a position of authority over himself. Now, positionally, this centurion is actually in charge of Jesus. He would be within his political right to actually attempt to command Jesus to come and heal his servant. But he took a wildly different approach. This guy, he might just be one of the most humble characters that we ever meet in the Bible. He says, "I'm nothing compared to you, Jesus," and this attitude is not lost on Jesus. Let's keep going in verse 7. "That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word and my servant will be healed, for I myself am a man under authority. With soldiers under me, I tell this one go and he goes, and that one come and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. This is a really cool story that I think is easy to miss in the whole Gospel of Luke. It's kind of sandwiched between more popular stories that we tell more frequently, but it's awesome. Jesus does in fact heal the servant just like the centurion asked. The centurion knew that Jesus could heal him without even being physically present because the centurion knew, I have the power to command people who I'm not even close to, and he had already acknowledged that Jesus is far greater than he is. But it also said that Jesus was amazed. And this is really cool because I had never studied this before, but I got some notes for this sermon from a guy named Mike Bro. And in his study, he found that in all of the wide range of emotions that Jesus experienced here on earth, the Bible actually only tells us that he was amazed twice. The first time when he was in his hometown with people who had known him in his whole life, and he was amazed at their lack of faith when they rejected him. And then this time, when he's amazed at this centurion's humility and surrender and faith. I think we all need to try to identify with this centurion a little bit more. If we want to have an encounter with Jesus that can alter the course of our lives or the lives of the people around us, we need to have humble and surrendered hearts. That needs to be our prayer for ourselves and for our friends, for our family members. And as we go throughout this Christmas season, we need to pray, God, I want to have an encounter with you Will you please prepare my heart to be receptive? Will you please humble me and help me surrender? Will you please prepare the hearts of my friends that I want to encounter you? Because Jesus performed a lot of miracles for a lot of people, but not everyone walked away with faith. Sometimes an encounter with Jesus can just be a fleeting moment that doesn't actually change anything. Jesus does a lot of miracles. One time, he even feeds over 5,000 people by multiplying 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. He literally has them eating out of the palm of his hands, and then he starts talking about carrying your cross, counting the cost of discipleship. He talks about what it means to deny yourself, what it means to place yourself under the authority of God, to submit to his leadership, to conform to his word. They literally eat their fill of miracles and then walk away saying like, that was a really good lunch, but I don't want anything to do with all that. Why? Because they still wanted to call their own shots. I don't want to be harsh on them because I feel like I'm the same way. They weren't willing to humble themselves. They didn't want to surrender to someone else's leadership, to place themselves under somebody else's authority. I'm free. I don't need to do that. All right, we all like to buck the chain of authority from time to time. Just watch kids for like 2.5 seconds and you'll see them do that. But we say we want to be God. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I don't want anyone telling me what's right or what's wrong. I've got my hands at 10 and 2 driving the vehicle of my life, and I am going to take it wherever I want to go until we inevitably crash. But the key to getting well, the key to getting whole, to restoring sanity, to restoring relationships, the key to living a transformed life is humility. It's surrendering to God's authority. That's why every person that's truly successful in recovery, successful in marriage, successful in relationships, in parenting, successful in any of the things that matter, have surrendered their self under the care and control of a loving God. I do want to clarify something that I get mixed up with sometimes. Surrender is not the same thing as commitment. And I don't want to confuse the two because commitment still has a little bit too much of myself in it. I can do this myself. I can beat this myself. I will discipline myself. Commitment that's based on sheer willpower and your own strength is really just setting yourself up to lose. And that's why accepting Jesus as our Savior is about so much more than simply making a commitment to live for him. That's true, but that's still putting a lot of the saving power on ourselves. And if you haven't surrendered to Jesus yet, and this morning you're looking for a new path in life, you're looking for the power in your life to overcome addictions, or you're looking for the power to fix your relationships, you're looking for the power to forgive people who have hurt you, or to forgive yourself for hurting other people, or the power to alter the course of your life, to change your story, you don't need to keep fighting so hard. You just need to, we have these towels down here that we don't talk about all the time. We call these surrender towels. They're like our white flag of surrender. It even says surrendered to Jesus on here. If you need to surrender your life to Jesus, just come grab one of these. We have pastors, we have elders who would love to pray with you and talk to you about what that means. But really, it's just coming down here and grabbing this and saying, I give up. And then you can do your best Carrie Underwood impression and sing, Jesus takes the wheel. Jesus, take the wheel. Kara told me I wasn't allowed to sing it for you, but that was probably wise on her part. But Dan Webster, in his book, The Real Deal, put it this way: commitment challenges us to a higher level of determination. Surrender calls us to yield the soul to God's higher purposes. Commitment is saying that I will do better. Surrender is giving up and allowing God to do his work through me. Commitment is my best effort. Surrender is God's competency working through me. Commitment is me trying. Surrender is me trusting. Commitment is me striving. Surrender is me submitting. Commitment is writing big, impressive verbal checks. Surrender unleashes the grace that can actually cash them. Not making grandiose promises and not saying, I'll never do that again, I'm committed, but simply saying, God, I surrender to your will for today and to your authority over my life. That posture can open us up to the transformative power of Jesus. You know, throughout this series, we're going to see Jesus interact with people in really different ways. He's going to get down in the dirt with a woman and her sins and advocate for her. He's going to meet secretly in the middle of the night with a well-respected member of society. He's going to physically touch people who others wouldn't be willing to get within COVID distance of. And here in this first encounter, Jesus doesn't even need to be in the same room in order to alter the course of this guy's life. Jesus encountered him through other people who knew of his authority and had seen his power, others who believed he was who he said he was. This centurion had an encounter with Jesus through people like you and me. So this morning, what I really need to ask myself is, what is my disposition? How can I be more like this centurion? Is my heart prepared like his was? Am I humble? Am I prepared to surrender? Am I prepared to conform to your word? And when I think of how I can introduce other people to Jesus, my mind goes straight to two students that I had in my youth group back in Missouri. And I might share their story with you someday, but for this morning, just suffice it to say that they're barely teenagers, and they've already lived an entire life of trauma and pain. And Janie and I worked with them a lot, but they still haven't surrendered to Jesus. And that's been my prayer for a long time, so that God will continue putting people in their lives that will over and over and over again introduce them to Jesus. But I also need to be praying that God can prepare their hearts, that God can supernaturally work in them to make them receptive, to prepare them to be humble, to prepare them to be receptive. So I want to end our time here this morning with some communal prayer. We're actually going to clump back up again wherever you're sitting. Find a group of people that you can talk with. And I want to talk about and share maybe somebody in your life who you know that is not yet following Jesus. Who in your life can you introduce to Jesus? If you want to be on mission with us here, you have to have somebody that you know who's not yet following Jesus, who you want to have an encounter with Jesus. Let's name them. Maybe we can take a moment and share their story if you want to. And let's stop for a minute. Let's pray together that we can have the courage to make an introduction and that their hearts are prepared to be receptive. And when we're done with that, Sean and the band are going to come back out and continue our time of worship through communion and through singing. But if you maybe need to surrender your own heart, you could ask your table, your people around you to pray for you. And during these next two songs, you'll have an opportunity to come, take a towel, find a pastor, an elder, have them pray with you. We would love to talk to you about surrendering to Jesus and being baptized. Because Jesus is the one with real authority, and Jesus changes lives. Let's pray that he gives us the same kind of humility as the centurion to approach him, so that we might be able to see the same kind of power flow from him to the people we love. Let's take a couple of minutes and talk about that right now.